HDS, sir. And how are you this afternoon? Alrighty then. I have a package for you.
Sounds broken.
Most likely, sir. I'll bet it was something nice, though.
This girl, how far are you willing to go to save her? I'd die for her. Oh, good. Now, where is he? Drop that zero and give it to hero.
Dude, what does my tattoo say? Sweet! What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet! What about mine?
Punch yourself in the mouth. What? You heard me. Punch yourself in the mouth. Right now, it's an order.
Spoiler alert, season 2 is on the way, so in the end, he obviously didn't kill himself, just like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the intersection of faith, family, and filmmaking. You're listening to Fearless with Mark and Amber, a behind the scenes of our filmmaking ministry, Fearless Features, where we are creating educational documentary films about the issues impacting our culture and society from a biblical perspective, and pursuing truth above all else. I'm Amber Archer, and joining me is my husband, author, director, speaker, Mark Archer.
Hey, what happened?
You can learn more about us and the movies we're making by visiting fearlessfeatures.org. It's also a great place to make that one-time or monthly donation if you are passionate about reaching the lost for Christ through film. Visit fearlessfeatures.org to share your support today.
Silence! I kill you!
Oh, yes. You had to get Ahmed.
Mm-hmm. What would you say you do here?
Huh? What would you say you do here?
That's the question being asked by all the Doge employees to virtually every federal worker. I'd like to ask several people that question. What exactly is your purpose here? Anyway, so we've got Curtis Hill with us here today.
Former Attorney General of Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote an article in The Federalist.
Yes.
And it was all about the USAID and the lawsuit that was brought on to reinstate the funds, billions of dollars. And Curtis is going to explain to us about his article that he wrote, because technically speaking, Trump could defy the orders, and he's arguing he should.
I think he's absolutely spot on. He should.
From a legal standpoint, it's always good to get somebody else's perspective, especially somebody who practices law. So,
yeah, I have great respect for Curtis's opinion on things like this, because we've certainly seen examples in our research of rogue prosecutors, lawless prosecutors. That is not Curtis at all.
No.
He is a law and order through and through. He was an excellent attorney general. He was an excellent prosecutor. So I give a lot of weight to his opinion on things like this. And he was also, if you're not familiar, if you want to see him, how we met him was through our first feature, Fearless feature production, Inwood Drive.
right. And we talk about that at the beginning of our interview.
Yeah. But he was the attorney general when we were doing that film. And so that was kind of how we met him. And we got to see him doing his best under really impossible circumstances. One of the things I was going to point out, we were at an event the other night and his name came up. And I pointed out to them, I said, a lot of people don't know, when you watch Inwood Drive, if you haven't, it's our only film so far that you can actually watch on Amazon. You can rent it on Amazon.
But it's also available on our website.
It's available on our website. That when he was dealing with all this, the day of the funeral.
So recap really fast. Okay. So Inwood Drive is about the abortion battle here in hometown of Indiana in Fort Wayne. And the abortionist lived in Illinois. When he passed away, they found over 2,000 fetal remains at his home. The story quickly became international. People were calling us and asking about our take, because we seemingly had been the only ones to ever do an in-person interview with the man.
Yeah.
Intro, we go back into production because we thought what we had Inwood Drive done, and ended up having to pull the film and wait to do a re-edit.
About 6 months.
And insert Curtis Hill and the Attorney General's office, because he fought hard for those babies to come back to Indiana, where they were taken from.
And at the end of the film,
spoiler alert.
At the end of the film, the babies are brought back to Indiana, and there's a funeral service for them, and Curtis presided over that. It was one of the best speeches that I've ever heard, honestly, and I've heard a lot. He gave an excellent speech. It's in the film. What you don't know is that during this time, Curtis was being viciously attacked with a completely politically motivated Me Too movement kind of attack. He had women making false accusations against him. Incidentally, in case you're not aware, all of them have been dismissed now. Mm-hmm. Every single one of them. Completely baseless. It was perpetuated also by people in the House and Senate and in the governor's office.
Well, that's what happens when you stand up for truth and righteousness. And also the day of, he also lost his mother.
Exactly.
So
what we saw was a man who was under fire like I've never seen before. Mm-hmm. And he did his due diligence. He did it with excellence. And in the end, he has been vindicated completely. Mm-hmm. There were many who abandoned him. And I can say that we did not. We believed that in his innocence from the start. Yep. And because the man that we dealt with, we have,
right.
Yeah, we pretty much know how to read people. And what we saw him being accused of, we went, that's not. Mm-hmm. No, we have a pretty good creep meter. that's not Curtis. So
well, and without further ado, let's get to our non-creepy friend and legal expert.
There we go.
Breaking news, over 2,000 fetal remains discovered in unincorporated Will County. This is disturbing on so many levels.
This one patient that had an abortion, young girl, she shows up in the emergency room. That's where I said, this is enough.
When are you pro-life people going to do something about this abortionist? He's butchering women. Dr. Cly, we've been waiting for you to call.
It is dangerous, and I told my patients, your life and your health will be at risk.
The word abortion is out there.
As a doctor, I want to protect the patient.
You are contemplating an ordinance that seeks to address a problem that does not exist.
It was an extraordinary shock that someone would discard remains of children.
They found fetal remains in the trunk of a vehicle.
Any idea if someone helped him store these fetuses?
We may never know why this was done.
Do you believe what you've done is right? Have you asked for forgiveness for killing children?
It's not a life.
Curtis, it is so great to have you with us, joining us today on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Amber. Mark, nice to see you again.
Yeah. So can you just give people a quick rundown? You were in our two of our films, Dysphoria and Title IX, and did an excellent job, especially as former Indiana Attorney General. Could you just give people a brief history of your background and a little bit about what we're going to talk about today?
Well, sure. And of course, I'm sure that some of my best stuff was left on the cutting room floor. I usually get edited out of most of my good stuff. So you can attest to that. Well, fortunately, we've enjoyed a very nice, long association, and I appreciate the two of you and our engagements. I'm a former prosecutor. That's my career choice. I was a prosecutor for 28 years, 14 years as the elected Elkhart County prosecutor. I'm very proud of that designation, particularly because the role of the prosecutor has become very controversial in the last several years. And I was a traditionalist in prosecution, a firm believer in the rule of law, a firm believer in tough enforcement, but also a believer in protecting rights. Mm-hmm. And making sure that the system worked correctly. From prosecuting attorney, I moved on to attorney general for the state. I was attorney general from 2017 to 2021. And I think what was remarkable about that period of time is that we really boosted the influence of the Indiana Attorney General's office. We were connected to a lot of national causes. We were involved with a lot of White House causes during President Trump's first term. I had several meetings at the White House, several meetings at the Justice Department. We really put the Indiana AG's office on the map, not just representing the citizens of the state, or the state citizenry through the state apparatus, but also looking for ways in which we could increase the effectiveness of state government, whether it was through evaluating legislation on behalf of the General Assembly, or even working with law enforcement personnel across the state to get them more resources to be more effective. So that was a very important aspect, and I really enjoyed that time. I think that's when the three of us met, and we did lots of good work together in that regard. Currently, I'm back to practicing law on a limited basis, doing some consulting work. I'm looking at the possibilities of what's in the future. What I have found in my last few years is that I love public service. I love fixing things that need to be fixed on the public scene. So there's lots of things I've done on the behind the scenes, which can be very effective. Real question on whether we get back out in front of the cameras again. So we'll see.
Well, and it was great. And like you said before, because we initially met through our first film, Inwood Drive, and you were battling with the fetal remains that obviously took place in Indiana, but were transported to Illinois. And so it was great for us to meet you then as the Attorney General, and just how hard you worked behind the scenes for the pro-life movement and ensuring that dignity of life, no matter the stage, was represented well.
Well, let's not forget how hard you two had to work, because you had to redo your ending of your film.
You know, the Lord.
I remember, you practically had it in the can.
Yeah.
In September of 2019?
Yes. Yes.
And because of the discoveries and because of how things handled, it really changed the complexity of your piece, and I think really gave it a poignant cast over this whole issue. Mm-hmm. So it was very good. And I think you said to mention why we're here today. I last week I wrote an article for the Federalist, and it was based upon observations that I was making with regard to the Supreme Court's decision, 5-4 decision, to basically compel President Trump through his executive capacity to spend $2 billion on foreign aid, contrary to an executive decision that he had made to the contrary. I found that decision particularly troubling because of its attack on the separation of powers, and it's indicative of what's happening today. It's been happening for a while, but it's this increasing effort of single federal district court judges taking it upon themselves to change policy of the executive branch, and not necessarily because it's the law, but because I'm not sure what their basis is. I mean, I don't want to say that I support anarchy and lawlessness, but I do support the Constitution. And when we see this type of judicial overreach, we have to start responding in a different way, because we simply can't allow judicial overreach to consume us, and then you have the judiciary as supreme in the land. We're supposed to have balance. And when it comes to executing the executive branch of government, the president has to have supremacy in that capacity. And so that was the genesis of writing the article, and I hope the message that was conveyed through reading it.
Well, and it absolutely was. I mean, when I read it, and I sat there for a moment after reading it, and I thought, what do people really need to understand? And it's almost like we need to have a lesson on constitutional authority and what are the executive branches and what do they do and their function, because that's really what seems to be lost on a lot of people anymore, is who's actually in charge and of what. And especially prevalent because of what we've seen over the last 4 years before Trump took office. I mean, it was just chaos, seemingly.
Well, it's interesting, and I think you're right. People need to reflect and review the Constitution. Lots of people cite the Constitution as the basis for their value system, belief systems, etc., but really haven't read the Constitution, or if they have read it, may not understand it. And if they think they understand it, may be overstating their understanding. Because if you look at the Constitution in its basic format, there were lots of things that were sort of left to interpretation. And I go back to our first president, George Washington, who I think was remarkable in the sense that when you look at the constitutional charge that he was given as the executive of the government, there were not too many. There wasn't a roadmap on what to do.
Right.
He can make treaties with foreign dignitaries. There was no policy in place on how to effectively set up a federal government. He had to make it up based on that document's rather vague instructions. And if you go back and look at it from that standpoint, it becomes an interesting exercise in saying, how did we get to this point? How did this balance start? How did the balance exist? It certainly was meant to evolve itself. It was meant to have hiccups and bumps and resolutions. And it's absolutely amazing that over 250 years we've been able to sustain this. But there have been periods of time where there's been some real crises, if you will, on what does the Constitution say about this. And I think we're coming upon that issue with regard to executive authority, looking at judges stepping in and stopping or starting a political process. I think making, let me back up. When you have a country that's $36 trillion in debt, you can very easily make the argument, if you're the executive authority of that country, to say, we can't afford to do X, Y, Z. We can't pay for X, Y, Z. This particular order said, well, Mr. President, you can't make a determination that we're broke or that that's a waste of money or an ineffective use of money. You have to do this because the bureaucracy is in charge. You're not. And that's what this decision did. This decision gave power to the fourth branch of government, the bureaucracy, and said that when you have a bureaucracy that's running the show, you can't come in and take it out. Well, the American people were very emphatic about what they wanted on November 5th. They wanted someone who was going to come in and shrink government. And lo and behold, this is the first time we've actually had a president who came in. Even if you don't like what he's cutting, if you don't like the tactics, by gosh, he's targeting a fat, bloated government, and he's putting executed things in place. He's cutting the federal workforce. Well, you know what? The United States of America is not for the federal workforce. It's for the people. So this idea of putting the federal workforce ahead of we the people, well, that's ridiculous. I don't want to see people lose their jobs nilly-willy, but if we've got a bloated government, doesn't it make sense to start identifying areas in which the bloat is extreme and start making cuts? And how do you do that? You can try to make a surgical approach, which you'll be at for days and the bureaucracy will win because people have tried that and failed before. Or you can take a look at it and say, wow, do we need this? Let's cut it, make them come back in and justify their existence and build this from the bottom up instead of just assuming that we're just going to keep going and keep growing and keep moving further and further into the abyss.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because this court order is from a district court. And, and that's the thing that people, if we remember, through the Constitution, we have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and then judicial. And in the judicial, which is where the courts are, we've got the Supreme Court, the appellate court, and then the district courts. And so you're talking about one of these lower courts, which you rightfully pointed out, is making rules at an upper level that it really has no jurisdiction.
That affects the entire nation.
Exactly.
The entire nation. And it's interesting. One of the best quotes I've seen in an opinion was Justice Alito. I can't quote him verbatim, but he basically said, here's a single federal district judge making a decision in an area where he probably doesn't have jurisdiction.
Right.
And is able to compel the executive branch to spend money that the executive branch doesn't believe it has. I mean, that's he said he was stunned that the majority came up with that opinion, and I am as well. It doesn't shock me that the three lefties would go that route. But it's interesting that you have people on the court who you believe have conservative credentials that believe in the separation of powers and limited government, and that Justice Roberts and Justice Comey would, or Comey Barrett.
Comey Barrett, yeah.
Would take a position that I don't want to call it political. I want to call it that empowers or emboldens a federal district judge to wreak havoc among the government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me just read this paragraph that you wrote in here. Justice Samuel Alito, joined by Justices Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh in dissent, saw through the charade. His words cut to the core of the issue. Does a single district court judge who likely lacks the jurisdiction have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose forever $2 billion taxpayer dollars? The answer to that question should be an emphatic no, but a majority of this court apparently thinks otherwise. I am stunned. And in fact, today, as we're recording, March 10th, I just saw a piece on Fox that they were talking about, this judge, the Trump administration is ordered to pay part of the $2 billion in foreign aid by today. I mean, I don't even kind of comprehend where this judge, and I think they said he's a Biden appointee. Yeah. Did you see that?
Like last year.
Not even on the bench very long.
Well, and has no understanding of the complexities of federal disbursements. I mean, you don't just like wake up on Monday and say, cut a check for $2 billion to such and such. It's outrageous, is what it is. And the interesting aspect is, what do we do about it? And the article discusses that. I mean, the issue becomes, does the president have to abide by it? And ordinarily, we say, well, it's a court order, and therefore we follow the court. And I question that. And that's unusual for me because I'm a rule of law guy. I have believed in the process, but I tell you, I've seen the process become more and more corrupted over time. And I believe this is an example of a corruption of the process. Now, when I use the word corruption, I don't necessarily mean that Amir is on the take. Amir Ali, the judge, I'm not saying he's dirty in that sense.
Right.
I'm saying that the process is corrupted because people have lost sense of what the true value of the responsibilities are. And we're supposed to say a federal judge says, no, you can't do that, and the president should just stop. And I say, well, wait a second. If the president believes that his enforcement authority has been challenged inappropriately, why not ignore the order?
Yeah.
Well, and we've seen this process used through rule of law, through the court system. We've seen this process used so many different times to stop something temporarily and then for it to just be overturned later on. I mean, we've watched it over and over again.
It's overturned over eventually, and as Justice Alito says, in this particular instance, you pay the $2 billion out, and then it comes back, and you didn't have to do that. You're not getting the $2 billion back.
That's right.
But more importantly, it's really not about the money. The money is a mechanism. It's really about governmental authority. Who has the authority to run the show?
Yep.
And do the two of you and myself, do we want a federal district judge in Washington, D.C. to have more authority than the president of the United States on executive policy?
Because we didn't vote for him.
No. Nor would you have.
No. So, Curtis, what are some of the things that people should be watching and looking for? How can we better prepare ourselves for the inevitable I don't necessarily want to say the attacks on the Constitution, but I mean, that's been going on since the creation, let's just be honest, of our government system. So what can people be doing to kind of keep engaged in the political aspect of things?
I think that people cannot get educated enough about our system of government, our how we were set up, just to understand it. I mean, as I pointed out before, reading the Constitution, so many people and people who are more aligned with the three of us with our thoughts, even sometimes mess up on the Constitution. Someone will say, "Well, my right to have a gun is like Constitution says so," and another person who will say that we shouldn't be carrying guns will say that that's based on the Constitution. So understanding the document itself is the first step, and it's not like automatic. It's not like it's very, very clear. Everything that we've done, that we've had back and forth on from a constitutional standpoint, everybody's arguing for the same Constitution being the basis for why they're doing it. But it begins with understanding what our government's about how the process should work. It's also about learning how to listen and recognize that politics is about levels of compromise. Especially in these days where we're so divided. For example, when I look at what President Trump is doing from a funding freezes and personnel layoffs and firings, I go back to a basic root question. For me, it's not about the firings and the budget freezes. It's about what is it that we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to get our arms around and manage this beast of a government. Mm-hmm. Now, either we're going to do that or we're not. If we take a position that if we all believe that our government's bloated and that it's out of control and we can't manage it, are we going to do something about it, or are we going to say, like what's been done in the past, these are the problems that we have, but we can't make those cuts over here because that's too many people to cut. We need this program, all of this stuff we need. We just have to keep going. And then what happens is it grows and grows and grows. So at some point, we have to have the courage and the will to say, no, we don't need that program. And someone said, well, but if we don't have that program, people will be hurt. Yeah, I get that. That is a risk. But if we continue with that program and other programs, we may not have a country. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At some point, we've got to make some really tough decisions on what is it that we have to do versus what is it that we would like to do versus what is it that we get to do. Right. And we're at a point where we have to really break down what we have to do and do that really, really well. What are the things we have to do? Public safety, national security. Those are things that we have to do. But even those things have wasted aspects to them. It was fascinating when the president gave what I happen to believe was maybe his best speech the other day for the joint session of Congress. He ran down a laundry list of absurdities that the federal government had been paying for studies and things, mostly in foreign countries, to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. And I don't know how anybody could look at that list or listen to that list and not say ridiculous, mm-hmm. ridiculous, ridiculous, ridiculous. And that makes the case right there that we have a system that's out of control. All of the things that he mentioned during that speech were things that we absolutely not only could do without, don't even need to even think about. Mm-hmm. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And that's what we have to be thinking about in terms of learning how to understand what our government doesn't do, and what levels of support that we should be making to see these things through.
Well, and I think it's so many people kind of look at politics and they're like, well, I don't want to get involved. But, why is it so important for all of us to understand the Constitution? I mean, I know the answer to that, but can you explain, especially from being in public service and as a prosecutor, you see day in and day out of things and how they go wrong. Explain to people why it's most important. I mean, you did a good job even in just the article and some of the explanation that you gave, but I can hear someone saying, well, that's just not really my thing. Somebody else will take care of that.
Well, I mean, you don't want to be a knucklehead.
Right.
And the way to avoid being a knucklehead is to learn about the system and learn about why, and not just trust whether you're on one side, Fox News, or whether you're on the other side, CNN, because that's all mostly entertainment. I used to say, do your own research. And I still say do your own research, but even that can be tricky because the research is skewed because of the media operations that have a tendency to jam you up with what they want you to see and evaluate. I find it very difficult sometimes when I'm researching an issue to understand what's true because there are competing interests that I'm looking up directly in real time, and I'm learning, wow, everything is got a bias. Everything has a lean to it. Everything has a tilt. But you don't know that unless you dive in and start examining these things. Once you start examining these things and your eyes are open, kind of the red pill, blue pill moment, once you realize, okay, now I see this, then it's time to pay attention and get to work. There's so many folks who are conservative minded, people who are friends of mine, people who are supporters of mine, that quite frankly are out of control because they get fixated with an ideology and they put blinders on and they don't see beyond their own ideological limitations. And sometimes our side gets it wrong because we're too focused on a particular point and we don't see the big picture, and the big picture is where we're going to get crushed. That's a matter of experience, of getting involved. I had a conversation with an elected official recently, and a very conservative-minded person, and it was an example that I've seen over and over and over again. A person that's on the outside of the political system and is a conservative, very active, very activist, very opinionated, we got to do this. Boom, 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 very certain. You become an elected official and your responsibility changes. No longer are you just purely an activist who can push hard and drive. Now you're a representative of a body and of people who have a broader sense of thinking than how you think. So you, out of that responsibility, you have to look at being fair. You have to be looking at hearing all sides, giving an opportunity. Well, when that happens and you're a conservative, you oftentimes get called out as a rhino because you allowed the other side, the softer side, the more mellow side, to have a voice. Well, no, I'm an elected representative. You've got a voice. They've got a voice. They have access to me. I want to hear all sides. I want to make a decision. You can't do that. You got to do this. And you're a rhino. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. But we hear it all the time. Now, I don't want to make excuses for people who are not what they claim they will be. But the idea is getting involved, understanding what you think, why you think what you think, and then giving some leeway to the other person's thinking. That's how we get things resolved. We will not survive as a nation for much longer if we continue to be as divided as we are. Right now, we're on top. Our guy is in top. We were miserable for 4 years because we had Joe Biden and the absurdities and oh my gosh, it was this, it was that. We were in horrible shape. The country was divided. Now the country's still divided, but we got our guy in, so everything's good, rosy. Well, no, it's not good and rosy because the other side is doing everything that they can to tear away and tear away and tear away. And quite frankly, when Joe Biden was in office, we didn't exactly cotton up to him that much because he was not very good, so we didn't like him. Well, the other side will say the same thing. They'll say, well, we don't like Donald Trump. He's not very good. And we say, well, yes, that's a difference of opinion. The idea is we are one nation ultimately, and we've got to find ways in which to bridge our gaps and move forward. It may not be in this next 4 years because I see this next 4 years with Trump in charge as sort of a ripping off of the Band-Aid. It's doing the things that we've all been thinking.
Right.
that had to be done, the tearaway, like the freeze on federal workers.
Mm-hmm.
I do not believe the United States government is in existence to support a huge federal workforce. I've been to Washington on a number of occasions, and I've gone to many of our monuments. And if you've ever gone to there, it's fascinating to me to see Capitol Police. Oftentimes, I see Capitol Police who are obese, that couldn't chase down a bandit if their life depended on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so right away, and this could be wrong on my part, but right away I'm thinking, oh, this is an example of the federal bureaucracy at work. Here's a person who got a job somehow because they were affiliated with the right party, and now they have this job. But I'm thinking, what's the role of a police officer in downtown D.C.? I would think that if somebody grabs a purse, you want a police officer to give pursuit. There's no way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way. And I'm picking on some of the Capitol Police, but it could be a number of incidents like that where we have flooded the federal workforce with largesse, and that's the focus. That's what you're seeing right now. The folks are going crazy about these freezes and cuts. Look what he's doing to the American worker. No, they're doing it to federal workers.
Mm-hmm.
We're cutting the federal workforce. We're cutting the federal government. We're cutting the bureaucracy. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And they want to elevate the federal bureaucracy to a point where that's the priority, so that the president comes in, okay, Mr. President, you can do whatever you want to do, but don't touch this federal government. Don't touch these employees. They're civil servants. They're here. You want to change that? No, you can't change it. That's in place permanently. I know you're the executive, but you don't get to do that. That's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to understand that, and then we have to be true to it. Amber, we need to make sure that when we're not in power, that we believe the same thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not just we believe this because our guy's in. We have to believe it because the other guy's in too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and that's what we try and tell people all the time. Just because this 4 years is going the way that we like, who's to say that it doesn't go the other way the next 4 years? I mean, and we have to continually look at what is the foundation that we are continuing to lay, and what are we creating for the next generation and the generations to come.
Well, and the reason that it's likely that it has switched back and forth, and that it's likely to switch again, is because the folks who actually control the outcome of these elections are not hardcore Republicans or hardcore Democrats.
Yeah.
The posts stay consistent. It's that 15-20% in the middle that swings.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason that you see the Republicans back in power in Washington, D.C. is because, rightfully so, Joe Biden's policies were so extreme, were so far to the left, that he pissed off a lot of people in that comfy middle.
Yeah.
Who don't fancy themselves Democrat, don't fancy themselves hard Republicans. They just want to see things done.
Yeah.
And so you say, well, what's your preferred pronoun? Oh, we don't want to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we start leading with preferred pronouns, you irritated people in the middle who aren't necessarily conservative, but they're common sense, and they're saying we don't need that. And so they pushed. The Democrats pushed and pushed and pushed and got extreme. Thank goodness they pushed so hard.
Yeah.
Because they pushed so hard, we were able to bring things back. Now, the danger for us, okay, now we've got the White House, we've got the Senate, we've got the Congress. So what are we doing? Anything we can. We're going to do it all, baby. We're going to get this done. So what happens? That 15 or 20% is looking over here and saying, well, we're cool with what you did here, here, and here, but now, do we have to do this?
Right.
You're going to swing us back to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, one of these sides has to have the maturity to recognize that, yes, we got a lot of our juice back. We can do a lot of things that we want to do, but we have to listen and not overperform away from that 15%, that 20%, because those are the people who are going to keep us in power. And it's important. It's better to peel off a little bit of our muscle and react there so that we have that second term or that third term or that continuity that we need, because that's really what we need. Over a period of time, we need a continuity of government, a continuity of our values to catch on, so that 15 to 20% that goes back and forth starts shifting our way, and they're there permanently. They're there for a reason. Yeah. That's what we're ultimately after.
Well, and do you think that even with Trump's cabinet that he's assembled and continues to assemble, with RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, they were Democrats, and having those people come on during this administration, I mean, do you think that was a wise idea to start bringing, different views of opinions or party sides, whatever you want to call it, and bringing them together under one administration?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely, it demonstrates a departure from the same old.
Well, and I think the maturity that you were just talking about, being able to bring people in with differing opinions and views, yet still going for the same outcome that we're really looking for, is a healthier nation. And I don't know, I saw it as a plus for the Republican side, if you will.
Yeah, no, I think it's a huge plus. I mean, take Bobby Kennedy, for example. And looking at that whole picture, Bobby is going to run for president as a Democrat because he's been a lifelong Democrat. They absolutely rejected him. They were so hell bent on protecting Joe Biden and Joe Biden's presidency that they didn't want competition.
Yeah.
So they went out of their way to set the process up, to rig the system, if you will, in the Democratic primary, so that Bobby had no chance. And so Bobby, what's he do? He gets out and he becomes an independent. No real chance of winning as an independent, but he's making some hay. He's got a following. He's got a celebrity status, and then he joins with Trump. People want to see these types of unions.
Yeah.
Now, Bobby hasn't. I know Bobby Kennedy. I think he has a belief system that is his belief system that's going to remain his belief system. But how interesting is it that someone who's been a lifelong Democrat feels so comfortable at home with a Republican president? Now, some might say, well, Donald Trump is hardly the example of a lifetime Republican president. I mean, he's a Republican, but he has his own view. He has his own thought. He doesn't adhere to the ideological aspects of things. He's his own man, and I think that's refreshing. I think it's we get too pigeonholed. Too many politicians or political groups try to make their political figures adhere to the 9 things that make you a conservative. The only thing that we should be doing as conservatives is we want less government. That should be the thing that binds us all. We can have 100 groups. What's the one thing that we can all agree on? Less government. What else do we have to agree on? Nothing else. Well, what about life? No, we don't have to agree on that. We would like you to take our position on it, but you may have a different position on it. But as long as you're talking about smaller government, giving power to the people, personal rights, things like that, we're good. But what about guns? Yeah, no, we don't have to agree on guns. We have to agree on a limited form of government. That government doesn't make the shots, that people call the shots. If we can agree to that, we're good. That's all we need to be. So that's what I want to see people in the Republican Party. I'd like to see that with the Democratic Party as well. But people need to move to the point of being open-minded about how we pull together on a common cause and recognize that we have differences, but most of those differences are not deal killer differences.
Right.
We can have differences of opinion and still sit down and have lunch, have an intelligent conversation. We don't have to choke each other to death.
Right.
Well, and I would point out, to your point, that limiting the size of government takes care of an awful lot of those other issues.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if the government is limited in size, then it's not intruding into your home. It's not trying to educate your children in the wrong things. It's doing its limited job of protecting the nation and its borders and upholding law and order and letting you handle your own family's security, right? All of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's being fiscally responsible, I don't know, maybe balancing its budget might be nice.
Well, but as you say, if you've limited the government and these things just naturally go away, your budget will take care of itself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we get away from, we got to do this, we got to do that, like Medicaid. There's lots of talk in the news today about Medicaid and how much cuts that we'll have to make to Medicaid in order to do this. Well, Medicaid is a thing that's nice to have if you can afford it. Providing insurance coverage for the poor who don't have coverage when you can afford it. What happens when you can't afford it?
Mm-hmm.
We just continue to go forward with it. Well, I mean, that's the big mystery here. We're pretending that we can afford all these programs and we can continue to do. And, you know, biblically, your family members were supposed to take care of widows and orphans.
Mm-hmm.
And the church can step in. Well, we put government in the place of the church and families. And so now families turn around and say, well, we don't have to do that because the government's doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So we build up these institutions and put it all on the government's back and not our own responsibility. And we pay a price for that.
Mm-hmm.
We pay a dreadful price for that.
Well, and I would just point out back to common sense, when you're $36 trillion in debt, you can't afford it.
No.
These extra things that we say, you know, if you can, no, you can't. We cannot afford this stuff. It's
and do you know how big $36 trillion is?
It's more than I got.
If you take a million seconds and take the seconds end to end a million times, that's 12 days. If you take a billion seconds and go from end to end, right in a row, that's 32 years. If you take a trillion seconds, continuing, 34,000 years.
That's an awful load of debt.
And so
and it keeps going.
And so to this,
that goes back before Adam.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. We have not experienced 34,000 seconds since Adam.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's and when you put it in that perspective, and then you look at the people who are protesting, and back to the point of your article, that a court is ordering that we spend $2 billion on something that it has no authority over, and you realize you are dealing with a completely corrupt culture. It's beyond politics. This is a culture void of common sense, you know?
Mm-hmm. So that's what Andrew Jackson did back in the days that he was the president. John Marshall issued an order that he didn't like, and he reportedly said, it's unclear whether he actually said it, but he reportedly said, well, John Marshall's made his decision, now let him enforce it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of gets back to the point of my article of, the Supreme Court said that this federal judge can make this demand on the president. Now what?
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes an interesting exercise. You know, there's contempt power. There are ways in which a court compels a decision. I think it's time to test that out and throw down the gauntlet and say, okay, what are you going to do? You going to send a warrant for me?
They've already done that a few times.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Boy, isn't that the truth? I mean, so I think it's.
What do we got to lose?
I think when we're at these particular times, this is a good opportunity to stand up and oppose constitutional corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And and I don't take that lightly, but as I said earlier in the top of our broadcast, I've really become maybe jaded a little bit about what I see in the legal system, in politics, just the level of corruption that needs to be ferreted out, and it begins with transparency. It begins with people being engaged in the process and being fairly engaged in the process, not just jumping in and doing their old ideology, but really being fair-minded about taking a good hard look at what's necessary in this country and how we get to it.
Yep. Well, Curtis, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your legal expertise with us. It has been fun. Any parting words for our viewers?
Well, it's always fun to get together with you guys.
Yeah.
No, just keep me on the radar list. I'm going to continue to look at and write on topics from time to time. I'm working on some things now that may be pretty interesting in a few months. One of the concerns I've had is that the issue of the protected class, I think, has gone out of control, and so I'm investigating whether it's time for us to pull the plug on the protected class and how it relates to our processes. So we'll see more for that in the future.
Yeah, well, we look forward to talking to you more about that. That sounds very interesting, Curtis.
That's why we like you, Curtis, because you get in trouble like we do.
I get in trouble every now and then, but I just shake it off.
All right, my friend. Well, until next time, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Well, hey, that's all the time we have for today, friends. Thanks for listening through to the end, and be sure to click that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And share this with your family and friends. Until next time, march on, Saints, and be filled with the Spirit.
I am dangerous. You're everyone's problem.